Let me set the scene for you. It's a Tuesday afternoon, just like any other. I'd just gotten back from work, exhausted from a long day, but excited to get home to my wife, Sarah. We'd been married for about 5 years, and things hadn't been perfect, but whose marriage is? You know, the typical stuff, work stress, some disagreements, but nothing too crazy. Honestly, I thought we were in a pretty solid spot. Well, I thought we were. But that day, it hit me like a brick wall. I walked through the door, the smell of dinner in the air. She was cooking. I remember the sound of the TV in the background, something lighthearted, like a cooking show or a sitcom, but as I walked toward the kitchen, my stomach dropped. There she was, sitting on the couch, texting. And then there was a sound that I'll never forget, the click of the door closing behind me. You know, the one that means someone just came in or left. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, looking back, it seems like the universe was giving me a warning. I called out to Sarah, but no response. So, I walked closer, only to see something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I didn't know who the message was from, but the tone, it was different. She was laughing. Flirting. Not like the haha, cute joke kind of laugh, but the you're getting a little too cozy with someone else kind of laugh. And my heart, it sank. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, so it's just a text. What's the big deal? Yeah, I could have been paranoid, right? Maybe I was overthinking it, and I should have just let it go. But something about that laugh, it felt too familiar. I've heard that laugh before. And it wasn't for me. I pushed it aside, told myself I was being ridiculous. But then, Matt, our neighbor, you know, the one who always popped by to help with something. The guy who was just being friendly when I wasn't home. I never really trusted him, but hey, he was a nice enough guy, so I let it slide. We had a pretty laid-back vibe going in the neighborhood. But the more I thought about it, the more it ate at me. Something wasn't adding up. I decided I needed to know for sure. And so I did what any reasonable person would do. I decided to snoop. I wasn't proud of it, but the gut feeling was undeniable. So I grabbed her phone when she left it unattended for a minute. Don't judge me. As I opened the messages, that's how I found it. A string of messages between Sarah and Matt that made my stomach twist into knots. They weren't just casual, they were loaded. Texts that no wife should be sending another man. My mind raced as I read through them. The flirtation, the plans, the when can I see you again, and I miss you. There was no mistaking it. Sarah had been cheating on me with our neighbor. And here I was, standing in the middle of our living room, holding the damning evidence in my hands. I didn't know what to do with myself. The rage hit first, like a wave crashing into a shore. But underneath that rage was something deeper, confusion. Betrayal. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The quiet, icy calm of the moment suffocated me instead. I wasn't even sure if I was angry at her or at myself. For missing the signs. For being too blind to see what was right in front of me. But then, my brain switched gears. There was something so satisfying about having all the answers, even though I wish I didn't have to know them. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I couldn't let it slide. I had the evidence, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This was bigger than just me. This was about the life we built together, the trust that was shattered, the family we were supposed to be. And if she thought she could pull this off without consequences, well, she had another thing coming. The plan was simple. I wasn't going to confront her here, not yet. Instead, I went straight to a lawyer, knowing I'd need something stronger than just a he said, she said argument if this went down the legal route. I had to be smart about it. And that's when I realized I had all the power now. So I gathered the evidence, prepared myself for what was to come, and took it to court. I knew I'd be walking into a storm, but I didn't care anymore. The truth was coming out. And if Sarah thought she could manipulate her way out of this, she was dead wrong. When I finally dropped the bomb in court, when Sarah saw the evidence, I'll never forget the look on her face. Her jaw went slack, eyes wide, like she'd been slapped. The woman who was so sure she could get away with it was suddenly scrambling, looking for any way out. But it was too late. And that, my friends, is where things took a turn I never expected. So, there I was, sitting across from Sarah in that cold, sterile courtroom. The place that was supposed to be the ultimate stage for truth, where right would triumph over wrong. But let me tell you, nothing felt right about it. Nothing at all. I was calm. Too calm, actually. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold. But I wasn't. This was my life. And everything I thought I knew, every ounce of trust I'd given, every promise we'd made, it was all being ripped apart in front of me. Sarah, on the other hand, she was a mess. I could see it. She was sitting there, looking like she might pass out any second. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine like they were magnets repelling each other. The arrogance I'd once known in her was gone. Now she was just a woman who had no idea what to do with herself, caught in a lie so big she couldn't crawl out of it. I'd shown the evidence. The messages. The photos. Even a few videos I'd managed to get my hands on. It was undeniable. She was cheating with Matt. Hell, if there was any question left, the look on her face said it all. But something wasn't adding up. She was too calm now. Too quiet. It was almost like she was waiting for something. That's when she pulled it. The card I didn't see coming. The one that, honestly, made me question everything I knew about who she really was. She started crying. Not the kind of tears that come from regret or shame. Oh no, these were the "I'm the victim here" kind of tears. She choked on every word, sobbing uncontrollably, as if she had been the one wronged in all of this. And as much as I wanted to scream, to demand she face what she had done, I stayed silent. I watched her. And that's when it hit me, she wasn't just trying to get out of this. She was trying to manipulate everyone in that room. She started talking about how I'd changed. How I'd been distant. How I wasn't the same person she married. The audacity. She went as far as to claim she'd been pushed into the arms of another man because I was too busy with work and too focused on other things. Seriously? It was like watching a bad soap opera, but it wasn't fiction. This was real life. And in her twisted mind, she was the star and I was the villain. I kept hearing her voice in the back of my head, spinning her lies, but I couldn't lose control. I had to stay focused. I had the truth, and I wasn't backing down. The judge didn't know what to make of it. She was sitting there, scribbling notes, glancing between Sarah and me, trying to figure out where the truth ended and the drama began. But the more Sarah talked, the more I saw the cracks in her story. How could she be the victim when I was the one whose world was just shattered? I couldn't let her get away with it. Not like this. Not with her trying to paint me as the bad guy. That was when Matt decided to show up. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked into that courtroom. He had this smug little grin like he was untouchable. Like he had no idea what was coming for him. I wasn't surprised to see him there. I knew Sarah had likely called him for backup. But watching him stand there, as if this was all some kind of game to him, made my blood boil. He did his best to keep his cool, but you could see the nervousness in his eyes. It was there, hiding just beneath the surface. He'd been caught, and now he was trying to pretend like he didn't care. Like it didn't bother him. But it was clear to everyone in that room, the truth was crashing down on him, just like it was on Sarah. And then Sarah dropped the bomb. The one that nearly sent me spiraling. She claimed I had known about the affair the whole time. That I had been letting it happen and allowing Matt to move in on her because I didn't care about her anymore. I swear, my head was spinning. I was losing it. I wasn't expecting her to come at me like that, and it rattled me. Her whole defense was so twisted. She was trying to turn the entire thing around on me, claiming I had allowed the affair to happen because I had been distant. That I had stopped being a husband long ago. And suddenly, I wasn't sure what to think. Was I the one who had failed her? Had I not been present enough? Was she really that miserable with me? All these questions started flooding my mind. But then I remembered. The texts. The calls. The lies. She was trying to make me doubt myself, to make me feel guilty. But I wasn't falling for it. I couldn't. The judge asked if I had anything else to add, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind was racing. Should I go for the kill shot? Should I call her out on everything else she'd said? I needed to stay calm. I had the upper hand. Finally, I stood up. I could feel the weight of the room on my shoulders as I looked straight at Sarah. The woman I'd married. The one I thought I knew. "You've been lying this whole time," I said, my voice steady, but full of that unshakable anger. "You think you can manipulate this entire room and make me feel like the bad guy, but it's not going to work." And that's why I went for it. I pulled out another piece of evidence, a voicemail from Matt, one where he was practically confessing his feelings for her. The entire room went silent. Matt's face turned pale as he realized he was done. But Sarah? She looked like she might pass out. The act was over. And now, I had the upper hand. It was like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. The whole courtroom felt heavy, suffocating even. The atmosphere was thick with that kind of awkward tension you can almost taste, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, almost like they were waiting for me to crack. But I wasn't about to. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. The judge was still scribbling down notes, but I could tell she was starting to get tired of the back and forth between Sarah and me. I couldn't blame her. This was dragging on longer than anyone had anticipated. Sarah was clinging to her story, painting me as the villain, the distant husband who had pushed her into Matt's arms. I could see her doing it, trying to wrap herself in this little narrative she'd built up in her mind. It was as if she thought she could say these things enough times, and they'd somehow become true. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I leaned forward, ignoring the feeling in my gut that told me this was only going to get uglier. My eyes flicked between Sarah and Matt, who was sitting there trying to act like he had no clue what was going on, but we all knew better. He was a coward, hiding behind Sarah's lies and pretending he was the innocent bystander in all of this. His little smirk was still there, though, like he thought I was the one who didn't have a clue. But I wasn't the one who was clueless. I had the receipts. And I was done playing games. I'd been quiet for a while after pulling out that voicemail. But now, I felt like I had to push. I couldn't let them just twist everything. I had to make them see the truth. "Sarah, do you really expect anyone to believe you?" My voice cut through the air like a blade, calm but full of the kind of anger that had been simmering for days. "You're standing there acting like I'm the one who pushed you into this. Like I'm the one who wasn't good enough. But you know what, Sarah? You know what no one else in this room can possibly know? I did care. I was there. I was with you. But that wasn't enough, was it?" I could see her squirming in her seat, her face turning red, her fingers twisting together like she was praying for an escape. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She was caught. And this time, she couldn't talk her way out of it. Matt shifted nervously in his seat, his confidence starting to crack. But instead of keeping his mouth shut, he tried to play it cool, probably hoping to keep up some charade of innocence. "Look, man, I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but," he started, but I wasn't having any of it. I snapped back, not even letting him finish. "Don't try to act like you're some saint in all of this. You're as guilty as she is, and you know it." My voice was sharp, loud, but controlled. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And you both thought you could just get away with it." I was watching Sarah closely now. Her eyes darted from me to Matt, back to the judge. She could feel the walls closing in. I could see it in the way her breath came out in short bursts. For a second, I thought she was about to break down completely. But she didn't. Instead, she went for a new angle, something I hadn't expected. She looked at the judge, trying to act like she was the one holding the moral high ground. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking just slightly. What my husband is saying is all lies. I've been struggling in this marriage, and when Matt came into my life, he gave me the attention I needed. I wasn't getting that from him anymore. I just didn't know how to handle it." She wiped her eyes, almost too dramatically. "I never wanted to hurt him, but I felt alone." She choked on the last word like it was the most tragic thing anyone had ever heard. It was the performance of a lifetime. She was playing the victim card like she had rehearsed it 100 times. But the more she spoke, the more I could see through it. She wasn't crying because she felt sorry. She was crying because the lies she told were falling apart, and the truth was coming for her. I wasn't going to let her manipulate this anymore. Not for a second. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. I could feel the eyes of the room on us, the judge, the witnesses, even the lawyer who was trying to keep up with the circus that was unfolding. "You're not going to make me feel sorry for you. You're not going to sit there and make everyone believe this is my fault. I never stopped caring, Sarah. I never stopped loving you. I didn't make you cheat. You made that choice." The room was silent now, the kind of silence that's heavy, like everyone's waiting for something to shatter. Sarah opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but she couldn't. The words wouldn't come. Matt looked like he might pass out, his face pale and his eyes darting between Sarah and me. "Do you want to tell them, Sarah?" I asked, my voice quieter now. I leaned in closer, staring right at her. "Do you want to tell everyone how many times you lied to me? How many times you told me everything was fine while you were screwing him behind my back?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she looked at Matt, and I saw the flash of panic in her eyes, the kind of panic that only comes when you know the game is up. The judge was now looking at us with a mix of confusion and impatience. I could feel the weight of her gaze. It was like she was waiting for us to stop playing games, for this ridiculous charade to end. And that's when I realized I had her. I had both of them. And now, it was time to finish this. It felt like the air was sucked out of the room as Sarah's silence hung there, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. The judge was staring at us, waiting for one of us to break, but neither of us did. I could see Sarah's chest rise and fall, her breathing shallow, but she wasn't speaking. She wasn't defending herself. She was trapped. And I realized, in that moment, I had her exactly where I wanted her. The truth was out in the open now. There was no turning back. No more lies. "Sarah," I said, slowly, making sure the words landed. "You've spent all this time lying to me. But now, you're going to sit there, in front of everyone, and act like you didn't do anything wrong? You're not a victim. You're a liar, and you've been using me for far too long." She opened her mouth, probably to say something, maybe to spin another lie, maybe to beg for mercy, but nothing came out. She closed it again, eyes darting nervously as though she was waiting for the ground to swallow her whole. She didn't look like the confident woman I'd married. No. She looked small now. Like a child caught in the act. But I wasn't done. I turned toward Matt. He'd been so quiet up to this point, and I could see that his cocky attitude had been replaced by nervous energy. He was shifting in his seat, tapping his foot like he couldn't sit still. He was done pretending, too. Matt, you think you're untouchable, don't you? I asked, my voice laced with cold fury. You think you can just walk in here like everything's fine, like I don't know exactly what's been going on behind my back? He stared at me for a second, trying to keep up the bravado, but I saw it. I saw the fear in his eyes. He knew the jig was up. He knew there was no coming back from this. He didn't want to admit it, but I could tell he was already calculating his next move. But there was no way out. He knew it, and I knew it. Then, I did something I hadn't planned on. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but at this point, I didn't care. I stood up and walked over to Sarah. I could feel every pair of eyes in the courtroom following me. The tension in the room was unbearable. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I had been holding onto since the beginning of this mess, another piece of evidence. It wasn't just a voicemail. No, this was something else, something that hit harder. It was a video. A grainy, shaky video. But it didn't matter. It showed everything. It showed Sarah and Matt together, in his car, laughing, touching, kissing. It was real. It was undeniable. I slapped the phone down onto the table in front of her, letting the video play for everyone to see. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw a flicker of fear, real, raw fear. It wasn't the fake poor me act she'd been trying to pull off. No, this was genuine panic. She was exposed. And she knew it. The video played for a few more seconds before I turned it off, but it felt like an eternity. The room was silent. No one said anything. The judge didn't even move. It was like we were all waiting for Sarah's reaction, wondering how she was going to spin this one. And then, it happened. She broke. I don't mean just a little breakdown. I mean full-on collapse. Her hands flew to her face, and her body shook with sobs. It wasn't the kind of crying you do when you're sorry for what you've done. No. This was the kind of crying that came from pure shame. It was the kind of crying that comes when you know you've been caught, when there's no escape from the truth anymore. Please, she choked up between gasps. Please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you. But it was too late for apologies. She'd crossed that line weeks ago, months ago. This wasn't about hurting me. This was about betrayal. And the worst part? It wasn't even about just cheating. It was the fact that she had built this whole life with me, convinced me that everything was fine, while she was lying to my face, stringing me along. I don't want your apologies, Sarah, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm done. I'm done with the lies. I'm done with the games. You think you can make this about you, about how I wasn't good enough, but you know what? I'm not going to let you turn this around on me. Not anymore. She didn't say anything else. She just sat there, her face in her hands, shaking uncontrollably. But I wasn't finished yet. I turned to Matt. You, I said, my voice cold, deadly calm. You think you're going to get away with this? Think again. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. No more hiding behind Sarah's lies. You're not the innocent neighbor. You're just as guilty as she is. He didn't look me in the eyes anymore. He couldn't. And that was when I knew the control had shifted completely. I had them both cornered now. Sarah, Matt, they both knew they were done. They could try to lie and deny all they wanted, but the truth was too loud, too clear. The judge finally spoke up, her voice cutting through the silence. "I think we've seen enough." And that's when everything came crashing down. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the judge finally spoke again, her voice breaking through the tension like a sharp knife. "I think we've seen enough," she said, and that was it. The game was over. The judge's words hung in the air, but I didn't feel a sense of victory. No, it was something else, something raw, something I couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't relief. Not yet. Not completely. My hands were still shaking, and my mind was still processing everything that had happened. How could I ever really process all of this? How do you go from thinking everything is normal, that you're happy, that you have a future, to discovering that your entire life has been a lie? Sarah was still crying, her face hidden in her hands, the woman I'd once loved reduced to a broken mess on the floor of the courtroom. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for me to feel sorry for her. I couldn't. The person who'd hurt me most wasn't the one crying in front of me, it was the woman who'd lived behind a mask for all these years, convincing herself that her lies were justified. That I deserved to be betrayed. Matt didn't say a word. He was the worst kind of coward, standing there like a deer caught in headlights, hoping the whole thing would blow over. He kept glancing nervously at the door, probably wondering if he could slip out and pretend none of this had happened. But I wasn't going to let him. No. He was going to face the consequences. We all were. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, looking between Sarah and Matt. The truth had been laid bare. There was no more pretending. No more he said, she said. No more excuses. The reality was staring us all in the face, and I was done with the lies. Done with the games. The judge finally called for a recess, which gave me a moment to breathe. I stepped outside the courtroom, my chest tight, my mind spinning. The world felt surreal, like I was walking in a dream. How had it come to this? How had the woman I trusted, the person I'd given my life to, betrayed me in the most unimaginable way? I didn't know what to do with myself. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part of me wanted to curl up into a ball and forget this whole thing ever happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't afford to collapse. Not now. Not when everything had been laid bare. I had a daughter to think about. A future that had to be rebuilt. And I wasn't going to let this define me. When I walked back into the courtroom, the air felt different, charged, like something was about to snap. The judge had a somber look on her face, and it was clear she had been thinking about everything she had seen. The next few hours were a blur. The judge had made her ruling, and while the legal side of things would take more time, one thing was clear: Sarah and Matt had been exposed for who they truly were. It wasn't over, but the truth had taken its toll. The lies were no longer a safety net for either of them. There was no more hiding. No more pretending. The damage had been done. Sarah looked up at me one last time before the court session ended. Her eyes were red, puffy, but still full of something I couldn't quite read. Regret? Shame? Or was it just anger, because the life she tried to build with Matt had been shattered? She opened her mouth to say something, but I couldn't listen. I didn't want to hear her words anymore. She had her chance to explain, to make things right. But all I saw now was the woman who had broken my trust in the most painful way. She wasn't the woman I thought I knew. I turned away, walking out of the courtroom with my head held high. I wasn't going to let her or Matt steal any more of my peace. Outside, the fresh air hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't the kind of relief I had expected, but it was something else, something that felt like a new beginning. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to be held back by this. I wasn't going to let them ruin my life, my happiness, or my future. I had a daughter to raise, dreams to chase, and a life to rebuild. And nothing, no betrayal, no lie, no affair, could take that away from me. As I walked down the steps, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a tiny ember, but it was there. I could see it. I could feel it in my chest. The future was still mine to shape. And no matter how dark this chapter had been, it was only one chapter of many. I wasn't defined by this. I wouldn't be defined by them. And as for Sarah? As for Matt? Well, they'd have to face the consequences. And as for me? I was finally free.